Welcome to Chestnut Hill College here in Philadelphia. I'm PCN's Corey Clark, coming to you from the East Parlor here at Chestnut Hill College to talk about election 2024 and gun violence. Pennsylvanians will vote this fall on the ballot will be President, United States Senate, all of the elected row offices, as well as legislative races as well. And joining us here in Philadelphia to talk about this issue, to my right here are Jeffrey Carroll. He's an associate professor of political science at Chestnut Hill College. In the middle is Randy Robinson. He is the political director for That Gun Talk. And Adam Garber, executive director of CeaseFirePA. Adam, why don't you tell us about your organization, what it is that CeaseFire does, and what you do?
CeaseFirePA is a gun violence prevention organization, so we're working every day to discourage people to gun violence and are safe, so that you can go learn at your school, you can go pray at your church or your synagogue or mosque, you can walk around your community or take your kid to the park and not worry about the crisis that's taking about 1,800 lives every single year in Pennsylvania. We do that by working with those closest to the issue, survivors of gun violence who've lost someone tragically, doctors who are pulling out bullets, and faith leaders and others, working with our legislators to enact evidence-based solutions like safe storage requirements and extreme risk protection orders, and educate and engage the public to demand what most Pennsylvanians want, over 80% of Pennsylvanians want, which is life-saving policies that we know will end this crisis. And I spend my time doing a mix of things, honestly, at CeaseFirePA, but fundamentally working with our staff across the state and our members to support those initiatives and ensure that we can build the kind of movement we need to ensure everyone can live free from gun violence.
Randy Robinson.
Hi, I'm Randy Robinson. I serve at the will and pleasure of the founders of That Gun Talk, Jarrell Crew and his wife, Freeze Crew. I serve as the political director. That Gun Talk is actually an organization that was created just several years ago, significantly to address the issues of gun ownership, gun violence within the African American community. We thought it was necessary that we interject ourselves in this conversation, particularly around gun ownership and gun violence into the world, because that we felt that the perspectives of Black gun owners, gun ownership, and the perspectives of laws around law enforcement related to gun violence, it definitely impacted African Americans. And I think there was never a unique voice or perspective of African Americans in that space. So That Gun Talk was created, also just not to just interject ourselves in the political space, but also all on the ground community building, because we realized that after the pandemic and the issues politically of 2020, the largest growing population of gun owners were African American females. So we thought that it'd be necessary that not only educate our community about the issues around gun ownership, but also do the training and proper safety to inform them, to give them a proper gun education. So we're a holistic organization related to gun ownership, certainly supportive of the Second Amendment in terms of every American's right to legally own firearms. But we want to make sure that our community whom choose to be firearm owners be responsible gun owners, and then also interject ourselves into this political dynamic around discussions around guns, because when we discuss guns throughout the Commonwealth, it depends on what community, and the conversation is very different. And we want to make sure that the voice of the African American community is actually being well represented in that space.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm Jeffrey Carroll. I'm professor of political science here at Chestnut Hill College. And my expertise is in American politics. And my scholarship is where American politics and its institutions intersect with cities. So I do a lot of work on Philadelphia and comparing Philadelphia to other cities. And I chase questions surrounding power and the way that we think of it, and the issues related to our institutions in thinking about how people behave in institutions of power in public policy questions like gun violence.
I guess for my panel, let's start with, we've had 2 assassination attempts on a presidential candidate. In the last week, President Trump had a second attempt on his life, and then here in Pennsylvania a few months ago, he had a first attempt. How have those incidents changed the dynamic of this issue, or has it?
214 attempts on the life of President Trump hasn't really changed the dynamic and issues. If you look at both parties, they're trying to politicize it to make sure that they sustain their base in terms of their perspective. I think for people who are laymen and advocates, and we're looking at the dynamics around law and legislation, I'm not sure exactly how the two attempts is going to impact that dynamic. There is a greater conversation to be had to see that such a tragic occurrence of attempts on the lives of political candidates for office, that we have Americans who are in a position to feel like that's their only recourse in terms of impact and affect change. I think the causation of that is as critical a conversation as to the experiences of the incidents themselves. You look into the background of the two suspects for these attempts, two very different age demographics. I'm not sure what their political ideology is. There's question in the back and forth, and each campaign is kind of saying that it was spurred by one person or the other. But nonetheless, I realize that what has changed is that the visceral energy around public office and running for public office and the energies that's happening, particularly with language. And then also we're realizing that we have an electorate on the American public that seems very, very on edge. And as you can see, we've had two gentlemen who felt that it was necessary for them to interject themselves into this race by making an attempt on the lives of President Trump. And then also too, I think the first shooter that he had initially looked up for an opportunity to attempt an assassination on President Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add on the policy side, I tend to agree. I don't think actually much has changed. It's notable in both cases, an AR-15 style weapon was, the weapon of choice in those incidences. And we saw, afterwards conversations around, I think there was a bill reintroduced, the Trump Protection Act, from a set of Democratic legislators, which was just a reintroduction of a bill that had existed. I'm sort of surprised, honestly. I thought that maybe in that moment we would find a space to say, well, we have to do something about this crisis that's taking the lives, that put his life at risk, and I'm glad he's okay, and that's taking the lives of thousands of Pennsylvanians and tens of thousands of Americans. I think, unfortunately, the politics of it, that it really exists within the electoral sphere and within capitals, not among the general public. So I just keep coming back to this. We have Republicans on our board, we have Democrats on our board, we have members across the space, but it seems like it didn't break through that logjam, which is probably, to your point, like a little bit of a testament of where we are politically. But I think ultimately it indicates that we've got to do something, because it is allowing the infected politics to become a risk to, I think, our democracy in a set of ways.
Yeah, I just agree with my fellow panelists is that we would think that with the assassination attempts that there would be a raise in the salience of the issue, especially in an election year, that the salience on the issue on real-time events can certainly raise and increase when things happen, particularly when something that tragic happens like this, of assassination attempt. And what we're finding is didn't move the needle much at all. So that means that the voters' priorities are still ranked in that same order. And then the issue of firearms and gun violence still is somewhere in the middle of the package. It didn't raise up any. So the question is why?
I will push back on one aspect that I do see was being politicized after the attempts is, again, the constant elevation of the conversation of central focus on the AR-15. Now the conversation is AR-15 style weapon. That's a conversation that we can have in depth, because the second shooter didn't use the AR-15. He was an AK-47, which has a caliber around a 7.62 by 49 grains. So me as a shooter, and I like distance shooting for practice, I'm not going to distance shoot with an AK-47. AK-47 is a Russian weapon, with large kickbacks. So it makes me question about, this attempt utilizing the AK-47, but I see everybody, the conversation crystallizing around the AR-15, which is, connected to the constant conversation about the ban on assault weapons, and which is that something that we certainly have a pushback on, and for very, very, very different reasons than I think that's largely purported or touted or conversed. So if we're going to talk about this, I think the politicization of it is always just the focus on the weapons, and we're not focusing as enough not on the weapons, but the causations and the mental health wellness of people and the political climate that people live in, that we have people whom are, embodying the spirit to go out and kill. So again, I'm just very,
Adam, is there any kind of motivation for your organization when it comes to an AR or assault style weapons, or some kind of a ban like we had maybe 20, 30 years ago? Is that something that you guys are advocating for, and something that you could even see as a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we continue to advocate for. They tend to be, used in many of the kind of known mass shootings like Uvalde, like Parkland, like this Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. I think, for a set of reasons. I will note, and a lot of our focus, to be honest, is on the largest chunk of firearms used to kill people, which are actually handguns. And, I think a lot of our work is thinking about how do we address gun trafficking that is driving illegal guns into communities? How do we, like lost and stolen reporting, or strengthening the background check system? How do we keep firearms from people who want to hurt themselves or others, where there are known information around this? Where we are seeing like warning signs of someone who wants to hurt themselves or others, and it's, worth noting that. And so we completely support, a ban on assault weapons. We can go through the terminology framing of these things and all. But I think a lot of our work, if you look at the vast majority of gun violence, is actually handgun related. And so it's really important when we're thinking about this crisis, I think, to be also talking about that aspect of it and solve both forms: a dead friend, a dead brother, a dead sister, it's a lost loved one, right? It's the same thing. But I think at the end of the day, we need to also be aware of that.
Jeffrey, can you talk about the political climate when it comes to something like an assault weapons ban? I think it was the Clinton administration where that happened. Compare that climate when it comes to guns to today.
Changed rapidly just in our awareness of how we think about firearms, and just in our vernacular, the idea that we can be quasi-conversive on having definitions on what an assault weapon actually is something that we've come a long way. And for now, as it stands, it's the majority of Americans, of the average voter, does support a ban on assault weapons. And I don't think that the average voter really makes the nuances that you would suggest among the weapons themselves, but nonetheless does support the idea of control for those weapons, which have been changing in salience over time. Just in terms of firearms, I mean, we have to think that about roughly just over half of the American electorate wants more stricter laws around firearms. But this about 33%, a third of our electorate wants to keep it the same, whereas the rest want actually a loosening of firearm control. So
I would suggest that the electorate and the people, there's a vast difference between being safe and making people feel safe. Safe is a mental mindset, and this is where the conversation around assault weapons tend to just for people to give them this philosophical feeling of safe. But anybody that know, I live in the hood, and I appreciate you guys' work, because that, the greatest weapon used in killing the black and brown kids in America is actually the handgun, the 9mm. So there's very little conversation about that. But why the conversation about the assault weapon? If me and my crew went out for the next 6 months and we decided to take golf clubs and club people in the head with them, then guess what? That golf club is an assault weapon. The weapon isn't an assault weapon innately by itself. It's by the actual utilization of it that makes it an assault weapon. Now, we do have weapons that have a carry platform that can actually fire more rounds and be more rapid. These sensationalized killings that these unfortunate shooters that have gone into mass shootings and gone into our schools has certainly captured the consciousness of America and said we should do something about that. But globally, if you're really talking about safety and gun violence safety, that's a very minuscule amount of folks who are actually losing their lives to an AR-15 style platform. It's the 9mm platform. And even if you banned it, that has nothing to do to eradicate the circumstances and conditions that are producing shooters in our communities. So I can purchase a 9mm handgun, and like I got the young fella back there, get me an extendo that gives me more opportunities to shoot. I can purchase 9mm plus P plus round munition would be as deadly as the delivery of a 223 that's delivered from an AR-15. I can tell you this, when we talk to the women and single mothers that are coming to us and they're talking about why they purchase a gun, it's certainly because the fear in the community, the breakdown of policing, and they don't feel comfortable. Because when you hold the hand of a mother whose child has been killed, dead is dead. She don't care if it was shot by a 22, a 9mm, AK-47 or not. So there are some different dynamics, and sometimes I'm a little bit perturbed and disturbed that this conversation happens just simply during an electoral cycle, particularly presidential, because we're not talking about the real affects and things that are truly working. And some of the program that you said are really, really identifying the root cause of what's causing gun violence. We're talking about the sensational scare that people see from media that this guy used an AR-15 and shot 20 kids. But overwhelmingly, the kids under 18 are dying in this country, and particularly Pennsylvania. And you can just look on the blotter in South Philadelphia. Under 18 shot, killed, or gunshot wounds by handgun. But there's no conversation to eliminate the 9mm. So if we're not going to eliminate every weapon, because every weapon is an assault weapon if you use it in an assault. If that's not the conversation, then we got to have a multi-layered, real holistic approach about what's actually motivating gun violence, and not just a single focus to make people feel comfortable that we banned one weapon. You ban the AR-15, the AK-47 is a platform, the M4 is a platform that'll actually deliver you as multiple rounds also. So it's kind of a political disingenuous just to make people feel safe that we're doing something, because we're talking about an assault weapons ban, which we know in terms of our Congress that really doesn't do a lot for the people, that it likely may not have been passed. It'll be conversation for the next 5 cycles while we're looking at the death tolls in our urban capitals, the black and brown kids pile up while we converse over if we can get a legislation passed.
Yes, I do. I think that in regards to the singling out of the assault weapons, it's the fact that it's when we think about some of the states that have enacted control measures, that the singling out is a larger part and parcel of a comprehensive approach to thinking about firearms, that it's assault weapons, but may include other things such as universal background checks, red flag laws, et cetera, that in those states, which with the assault weapons themselves, 9 states in Washington, D.C., we can think about the correlation between those control measures and the actual outcomes. So it's the pervasiveness of the weapon itself, of the assault rifles, especially in seeing that, not just through our media, but the pervasiveness of it, that would affect not just of our imagery of it, but the real stories, and the real scare.
The pervasiveness of the ownership of them, because I think it's about 6 million of them, AR-15 platform owners, and what percentage is used in crimes, or you're saying the pervasiveness of it, of people who decide to use crimes actually utilize this weapon. Because I'm an AR-15 owner. I own 2 of them. I love them for distance and practice shooting. And I can overwhelmingly say that the percentage of AR-15 owners who actually go out and create and do these heinous crimes is minuscule versus if you look at the percentage of 9mm owners versus in 9mm utilization in crime. So,
Well, the pervasiveness of guns is that there are more guns in the United States than there are people. And that's the point that I was making, to have being nuanced about what those guns are and what those firearms
Absolutely.
are given the broader climate.
Jeffrey, let's talk about the other candidate at the top of the ticket. Kamala Harris actually went on record and said, "We're not going to come for your guns. Myself and my running mate are gun owners." Why did she say that, and what are people on either side supposed to take from that?
I think on one side you could see this just as a means that in a presidential election that sometimes you move your politics over, and wanting to cater to a quote centrist voter, and having to sometimes pander to those voters themselves. But however, let it be known that her work, though, in leading the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in Washington, D.C., of doing some of those things that I mentioned in my previous point, in addition to her work as a prosecutor in California, especially related to domestic violence victims as it relates to firearms. So some of the things that was said in the debate is a call to some of that work, but certainly a call in looking the voter into their eyes to say, listen, I'm a gun owner too.
Adam, what did you think when you heard that?
Well, I would say Vice President Harris has been in the Biden administration one of the best we've had ever to prevent gun violence. And you just actually have to look at Philadelphia. We have seen a 50% drop in homicides to date compared to a year and a half ago. It's a significant drop, and if you go to that just gets us back to pandemic levels. It gets us back well ahead of that. It puts us down at 2015 levels. And I'll be clear, that's not far enough, because we're still losing too many people in our neighborhoods, and every person we lose is something to where, is someone's loved one. But I think for her, I think she is trying to say that we can have both. I have gun owners on my team. I have a great hunter who on my team and on my board who brings me venison every year. I don't hunt. And I think we can have both. We can believe in safe storage policies. We can support extreme risk protection orders and universal background checks. And most gun owners do. About, when you look at the polling data, a Republican-led firm did polling after Uvalde in Pennsylvania and found about 65 to 70% of gun owners support these kind of policies that we know prevent violence. So I think what she's actually signaling is, yes, I am really strong on going after traffickers who are supplying the firearms. I am really strong on supporting root causes, where she's helped invest billions and billions of dollars into violence prevention programs. And yes, I want things like safe storage, and I'm a gun owner. And that is actually the actual American and gun owner story, is people that want all of those things because they believe we can be safe, we can feel safe. And if you want to have a gun to practice shoot or to whatever, that's your choice in America. But I think that's really what she's signaling, that's where most Americans are, actually.
Randy, what did you think?
Well, I'm less impressed by that omission. I can think of 4 real reasons why she made that she made that known. Those 4 reasons would be Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, which are all very electorates are very pro-gun culture. So, again, is it political campaign? Is it pandering? I'm not sure. But it would behoove her in a very, very tight race with those states in the battle that she identified with those gun owners in those states. Again, as for their record in terms of reduction in gun violence deaths in Philadelphia, we've had a reduction in Philadelphia. Just across the country, these things, they just don't, happen in a vacuum. You got to look at what's happening in terms of the global dynamic. So there are a couple of things I know happen locally that certainly added to the reduction of gun violence by death in Philadelphia. Well, number one, we had a district attorney who finally impacted some arrests and some sweeps and took some really dangerous people off the streets with these young gangs and Zoo Gang and OB. And I forget the name of that. I don't want to disrespect those young fellows, but the fact of the matter is that there has been some large prosecutions and wrapping up some identified shooters that really had their peak during the pandemic when they were out. So those investigations did culminate with arrests and taking a lot of those folks off the streets. So that certainly related to the reduction in gun violence compared to the stats from 2020 and 22. Then also too, you look at the initiative from policing. So that's the other aspect of this conversation. We can talk about it legislatively and our ideas around safety and violence, but you can't have that without the element of policing and police force administrations, the tactics and how they actually employ their law enforcement officers, what their directives and their drives and their goals is. So there has been a reduction just across the U.S. in gun violence from our pandemic state. So multiple factors play into that because you can sit back in other cities and tout the same reduction in gun deaths, but it's you can't specifically say that at the highest level federal office was the emphasis for it. Most gun laws are state laws, and certainly policing are related to municipalities and council. So those municipal workers, the approach for it at the ground level and at the city or county level and also at the state level is far more critical than what the conversation is in Washington about gun violence in the urban capitals or just anywhere in America.
To our audience, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add one piece. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think we need to understand where those resources come from. So the federal government, the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and the PA Commission on Crime and Delinquency invested money in community organizations and in law enforcement to support those initiatives. So the police can't do their work. We can't have groups like AMIR or Mothers in Charge supporting survivors and intervening before shootings happen without those resources. The other piece I just think is really important from the political lens perspective here is I'm with you on the law enforcement piece. The Police Chiefs Association, the DA's Association backed multiple bills this legislative session that, we're talking about the elections that Republican legislators voted against, that those entities that law enforcement said we need on the books to stop the violence, to stop ghost guns, infiltrating our communities, to stop Glock switches from infiltrating our communities, which I think hopefully we can agree are not used in any other format way than except to cause mass violence. And so we have to ask ourselves from a political lens, when you have even the law enforcement community backing some of these policies, what are we doing when our politicians sometimes decide to vote against them?
For our audience in the room, if anyone has a question or comment they want to make, you can step up to the microphone and we'll get to you very soon. You guys have mentioned background checks, red flag law, stuff like that. Where does Pennsylvania stand when it comes to background checks, whether it be for purchase or for getting a license to carry, stuff like that? Where is Pennsylvania when it comes to that, and where should it be?
Yeah, so we have a state background check system that's run by the PA State Police. And I would actually say it's fairly comprehensive in a few different ways. It covers most firearms. The one exception is the private sale of long guns. So if we were to sell a gun to each other, I could buy it without a background check from him, just of a long gun, so a rifle or an AR-15 platform weapon, etc. That's the one gap. In terms of the background check system itself, it covers a few things that they're looking for. Do you have a record that makes you a prohibited purchaser? Do you have a protection from abuse order against you or something else that makes you a prohibited purchaser? It also checks mental health records that might make you prohibited activity. So when we talk about background checks, we should also be clear what we're talking about is there something on the law that you have done something that indicates that you should not have access to a firearm. It isn't a deeper background check, I think, as some of the public thinks beyond that piece. And that's really important and effective, but it's just a piece of the larger puzzle.
I can say this, we've had an opportunity at that gun talk. We were invited to Harrisburg to speak before the Second Amendment Committee. Actually, we were invited by the Pennsylvania Black Legislative Caucus, and this really crystallizes the reason that gun talk exists. The 2A law and 2A community is largely right-wing or conservative in value, and they support it. Myself is a moderate Christian conservative. But here's where I differ, and we differ with our strong allies in the 2A community. as a black man in Philadelphia, it is no way that I can love a firearm more than I love that brother right back there, that sister back there. So I'm a proud firearm owner, and I don't want bans on assault weapons. But there are some considerations that we got to take in this very serious. I'm prepared to be delayed at the point of acquisition to assure that firearms do not land in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. That's it. So that means that we got to have a deeper background check, a red flag law to allow you to identify that you know somebody is a gun owner and they're suffering some level of mental instability, that you can call in forces to remove those guns or from the house until that he's clear or clear to own a gun. Then damn it, we got to do it. So I support a lot of those measures, and particularly there is a big battle over ghost guns. No, I want every gun to be registered. I need to know everybody who owns a firearm, because my right and ability to own a firearm isn't greatly reduced because that somebody has a record that I own it. Damn it, they should have a record that I own it.
What's a ghost gun?
A ghost gun, ghost guns is an unregistered firearm. So that you can buy the upper, the lower, the upper, the lower, and the trigger. And that's really the gun, that part, the lower. And it's unregistered. So in
other words, you can buy the pieces.
You can buy the kits
and then put it together.
Yeah. So
the law does not see that as a firearm in the traditional sense.
No, because in TAC, what makes it a firearm is that the trigger mechanism is intact with a barrel, and that makes it a gun. A ghost gun, you come different parts, but there's a piece missing that you don't sell. But if you have a millwright and a drill system and you know where to put the pegs, you can easily assemble it. Well, our young folks, I'm not sure exactly, what their testing level in school is saying about them, but what I can tell you about them is that they are very intelligent. They are PhDs on YouTube research, and they've learned how to assemble these firearms by buying kits that are legal to purchase and then assembling and making them. And these are pervasive in African American communities, in urban areas, by people who with this strict, absolute intent to utilize them in criminal activity. So I'm the NRA and those organizations that, I'm a member of them, and Gun Owners of America, there's a big pushback. There's a sensitivity by any gun law, the bad gun law you're restricting. As an African American gun owner, we take a nuanced position on that. So there are some simple, common sense gun measures that really should be enacted, and we talk with our friends on the right about that because they're necessary, because we see that these opportunities, with a lack of these restrictions, is leading to bloodshed in the streets of Philadelphia and urban areas.
Jeffrey, why is it so hard politically to get things like stricter background checks, red flag laws, stuff like that? Is it the slippery slope argument? Is that one of the problems?
That's part of it, but government, as surprise, is so much of a slog. And there are some issues that's raised, such as this one. And a conversation that I have frequently with my students is that sometimes that the pace of technology, like trying to regulate ghost guns, for example, is trying to get the awareness of that and then working that through the political process. And then, of course, the disparate amount of opinions related to a complex issue like that makes it very difficult to regulate. So often what happens is that there's inaction.
All right, looks like we have someone with a question from the audience. Can you step up to the microphone, tell us your name and what year you are?
My name is Jess Bowling, and I am a sophomore from CHC. And I had a question regarding something Mr. Robinson said earlier. If anything can be an assault weapon, it can be a chair, for example. Do you think we should put heavier laws on all weapons, or is it specifically just gun laws that you believe in?
Well, I'm certainly not for
Well, yeah.
more legislation unless it makes sense. What I'm saying is that there are a couple things in play here. We talk about American culture. American culture is, this country is founded on the platform of a gun. There was gunpowder before there was America. So some people, when they have the conversation, they're not thinking about gun violence and those activities. They grew up in a household where you had a firearm, and it's literally part of their culture. You got hunters and fishers and game hunting, and this was kind of a rite of passage that they grew up. So you're telling them that you can't live your life with your historical background and your culture. That'll make, that's illegal. We're not going to let you do that. So you get a really visceral response to any level of legislation because of where you have the conversation in the United States, and even in the Commonwealth. It's a different culture and mindset how they see guns. They were introduced to guns by their grandparents, and they have proper gun education and gun storage and safety, and they don't see any and to them this is a part of our lives. I don't see anything wrong with why you're attacking me, and that's the largest pushback. And then again, you live in an urban capital, and the conversations around guns is only on the news, and you only see guns utilized by people of color or something in the crime. Then your mindset is like, oh my God, all guns are horrible. Like, why do we even have them at all? So you have these conflicting perspectives of how they see this gun conversation. And again, gun education and gun legislation and gun control and anti-violence, while all married together, are very, very succinct and kind of different conversations that you just can't have co-mingled together. And I think a lot of times that's what's happening why we can't get our legislature to pass anything timely, because you have it's a layered conversation and conflict, and it depends on who's having discussion and where the discussion is being had. So again, I just don't think about gun laws. Gun laws only impact people who follow the law. That's also the limitation of gun laws. Gun laws only impact people who follow the law. So, do we rob law-abiding citizens from their opportunity to protect themselves because of the activity of those who operate in a criminal element with firearms? Because people who decide to operate in a criminal element with firearms clearly demonstrate that they don't care about our standards of law. So that's a complex question. I wish I had a short bite solution, a sound bite solution, but I don't. But I don't think this legislation is just the way to go.
I just want to add two pieces to the conversation to kind of respond here. I think I don't hear about a rash of people being killed with guns, with chairs or golf clubs, as the example was given. And it's really clear why. We have trauma surgeons. One of the first conversations I had ever with a trauma surgeon about this issue, she said, I hope for the day that a knife wound ends up in my ER. And her point was really clear. Not actually she wants someone to be stabbed, but from an ER perspective, it is so much easier to repair the damage, whether it's a concussion from a chair or golf club or firearm. And I think we'd agree firearms are intended to harm, whether it's an animal or it's a lethal force weapon that's intended for that purpose. And so the reason the conversation as a weapon is about firearms is that if all the violence moved over to blunt force objects or even knives, the fatality rate would just functionally go down significantly, let alone the fact that you can run away easier and all those other pieces. So I think that's like a really important piece to understand when you talk to folks at Temple and the trauma unit and others who are healing this. The only other thing I want to kind of bring in, because we've been talking a lot about Philadelphia, is you're totally right. And I don't think anyone's saying don't go hunt. And it is a really large challenge in rural communities who use hunting for sustenance and in addition to their identity and part of their culture. And I think most of the gun safety laws that we're talking about don't interfere with that. There is a piece that doesn't get talked a lot about, which is 60% of all gun deaths in Pennsylvania are firearm suicide. And what surprises people, and we're in a school, so I won't give a quiz today, but I usually do, and most people, I have to admit, fail it, is the 3 counties with the highest gun death rates per capita are Philadelphia, Wayne County in the Poconos, and Fayette County in the Southwest, because of really high rates of firearm suicide. From CeaseFirePA's perspective, not only do we want to end the epidemic in our urban areas like Philadelphia, where I live in South Philly, and elsewhere.
I
But
live in South Philly.
we're all South Philly here. Apparently, we're going to ride back together. It's going to be a good conversation. But we also want to end it across the state. And when I've talked to folks like Maura Umble, who lost her son Alex at college age to firearm suicide. I've talked to folks like Cindy Warkow, who lost her husband Adam, and they're having the same pain and suffering of someone who loses it to the other form of gun violence out there. And so we have to look at this, and we need different solutions. But I just think it's also really important. I say sometimes half my job is saving the lives of gun owners. And I mean that seriously, because most firearm suicides are with existing gun owners. So we also need to look at that problem.
Yeah, we do. In so many ways, this issue is so uniquely American. To think that the foundation of this country happened on the back of violence, and it's embedded right into our Bill of Rights, with them written out as priorities that this is number 2. So just considering the nuances of that, the complexity of having a federal system, right? But when we compare the United States with the rest of the world and other advanced industrialized democracies, and then we just take just the deaths into account, we're so far above and beyond all of those other countries. And so if that's the case, and that we're sitting with that data, is it getting better or is it getting worse? If the trends are suggesting that it's getting worse, well, perhaps that's something that we have to address, and perhaps hopefully legislate if that's the case.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Your name and your year.
I'm Darian Wood, and I'm a senior. So basically, I want to piggyback off the last conversation we had, because Black Pennsylvanians are 21 times more likely to be murdered by guns. And we're getting a lot of implements of clear book bags, metal detectors in Black and brown schools. But if we look at who's shooting in the schools, it's predominantly white kids. So why is it that it's fair that we shouldn't put like restrictions on military grade weapons when they're going into the schools and shooting that, but the Black and brown kids are getting the repercussions of it, and you don't typically see that happening in the schools?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've gone down this path. Like, as a parent, like, we couldn't figure out ways, apparently, to move gun safety legislation that we know will prevent this violence. And so I think what's happened is we've said, well, the only thing we can apparently agree on is hardening our schools, whether that's requiring people to wear, clear book bags or go through metal detectors as you go in, or whether it's putting armed security guards in them or other pieces, or literally changing the shape of schools at times to harden them. And it isn't really, on the whole, I would say, working. And so I think that this was like a decision that's been made, I think, really problematically, because of the inability of our elected officials to solve the core parts of the problem and to come to agreement, and then the clamoring for something to happen. I think also we really want to think about, like, it is a real problem. I think it's a media problem and a societal problem, right? So on average, there's 57 shootings within a few blocks of a school every day in America. The ones you hear about, and they're catastrophes, so we will be clear, but like, are the Parklands and the Uvaldes, or the one down in Winder, Georgia the other day. But in a place like Philadelphia, we are losing our youth. We are seeing violence outside and inside our schools, and we have to solve it. What we know is often those guns being used are things like ghost guns that we were just talking about, because if you're 15 and you grab your parents' credit card, you can buy it online and get it and put it together in a few hours. They're coming from family members and friends because they were unsecured, because if you're 15, you can't go into the store in theory, unless they don't follow the law, and buy a firearm, right? And so I think the tragedy of what the conversation you're raising is that it's because we have failed our youth. And so, like, we have to do better, and we have to enact those life-saving solutions that will keep people safe. And I think we are, I will just say, I've gone to, in the suburban schools that are more white, right? We are seeing some of those same practices go out to those communities now because of it. I don't think that's the ultimate solution at the end of the day. Our kids should be able to feel like they can focus on learning, that they can be educated, and that they can worry about everyday things and not worry about running and ducking and covering or have to live in militarized, functionally like environments, right? But it was I think it's like a compromise at the end of the day in light of the lack of ability to do something else because of the politics around it.
Yeah, I can say that, in terms of school shootings, that we don't see them in urban areas. Why? Because urban kids, we're over-policed at school. So all the measures are in place to make sure that our kids aren't coming into schools with guns. We see them in these areas where that the perspective or attitude around learning is actually a more natural learning environment, and it's opening, and the access to those campuses is a lot easier. So I'm not sure one better or the other, but you look at those perpetrators of crimes of mass shootings in schools, and most of the weapons used, despite what the caliber of it, were actually legally owned firearms that were in the house that they just had access to. And then you look at those kids who certainly demonstrated a level of mental health and wellness and issues that there were red flags, but they weren't followed up on succinctly. And then until you have the crime, and then you look into the background and realize, like, well, there were some warning signs and that we didn't pick up on. So is it the assault weapon, or is it two things, that all schools should be policed as, fortified like they do in urban areas so that it doesn't happen? Or should we be even more cognizant about the student and the health and wellness of those students so that we can prevent these type of tragedies? So again, I'm fortunate that Black and brown schools in the urban areas, that we're not suffering those tragedies. But unfortunately, while we're safe in school, it is those Black and brown kids in those schools, when they're outside of school, overwhelming, those are the kids that are dying. So, while we're saving them in school, we're losing them in the street. So I'm not sure which conversation begets the other. What benefit is better, that your kid got killed at school, or your kid got killed on the way home from school? I think the answer is you don't want your kid killed at all. So I don't want to quantify about which situation is worse or what's more tragic or what weapon killed them. The conversation is about, we got to be realistic about, are we trying to save lives or are we not? Are we just trying to win political arguments?
Until we come to grips with the reality that violence among Black and brown folk has been a direct result of wholesale disinvestment over time and racist policies, federal policies that's over time to create conditions of concentrated poverty. And then owning up to that and being able to rectify that via investments into neighborhoods, investments into schools, workforce opportunities into the jobs. I think the situation will continue to perpetuate itself because it's been decades in the making in the creation of neighborhoods that have been underserved. And this is a horrifically unfortunate byproduct of that.
Thank you. Before we go to another audience question, the idea of school shootings came up. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, in Georgia, the most recent school shooting that was in the news. The parents were charged.
Yes.
And we've seen that a couple of times now. Where does that stand in Pennsylvania? Is that something that prosecutors in our state have done or can do?
There have been some rare cases of it.
And is it a deterrent?
So, I mean, in terms of what you can do in Pennsylvania, they were charged under childhood endangerment laws, I believe, in Georgia. I'm from Georgia. I grew up about an hour from Winder. They were charged under childhood endangerment statutes. In the Pennsylvania statute, there's been a few uses of it, usually around unintentional shootings when a young kid grabs a firearm. I think it happened in Philly. There was a few years ago a case where the firearm was stored under a couch cushion and a young kid grabbed it and shot someone, and I believe the father was charged. So it happens. There's some legal reasons it can be challenging. You often need knowledge, like there needs to be clear indications that the kid knew where the gun was or that the parent told the kid where the gun was. I think that makes it hard. And so it's one of the reasons we think laws like strengthening our safe storage law, which we don't have, to require secure firearm storage is a really important part of the puzzle, because it would make it easier to do that. I think just quickly, and on a deterrent, I think we don't know. I haven't seen research on it as a deterrent. I think it's a little questionable as a deterrent. I think they should be charged. I want to be clear about that. I think as like, are other parents thinking, oh, I should, and you may have a perspective on this, are other gun owners going now, oh, I could get charged, my gun should be secure? I haven't seen evidence, and I'm a little skeptical of it.
I'm not sure, but I think it's a positive step. I mean, anything that's going to demand or urge parents to be more accountable and responsible for their underage children, I'm all for it. I think in Philadelphia, the parent that got charged when the kid who found the gun that wasn't properly secure, I think he was only charged because he had a criminal background record and he shouldn't have owned the gun at all. But I think that type of prosecution should happen, because, at the end of the day, we got to be serious about what we're serious about. And we got to be adamant about the steps that we're going to take. So if everybody can dance around it and evade accountability, like parents or whomever, or gun traffickers or gun stores or gun show owners who sell guns through the loophole and look the other way, or if we were circumventing the background check, particularly with those who are doing gun trafficking and straw sales, then the whole system fall apart. If every aspect and every entity around gun ownership and gun utilization, if we're all not being serious and accountable for it, then it deflates the entire system. So. But I think parents should be charged in that access. And that's one of the things that I'm really on board with is safe storage. That's one of the things that we teach at that gun talk, because what we've learned is there's an overwhelming large number of new gun owners who have concealed carry licenses in Pennsylvania, and overwhelming number are African-American women. Well, guess what? They got a gun. They don't want to have it. They don't know what to do with it. It's not properly stored. They really don't know what to do with it. So every week you see that some child is being murdered or injured by access to a firearm that's not properly stored. That must stop. That's an easy fix. Then secondarily, that again, this is what we talk to our Second Amendment, is that now that Philadelphia, we have an access and we're distributing all these concealed carry licenses, which is great. But that's like giving somebody a car and not giving them driving lessons. So I think that if you're going to acquire a concealed carry license in the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania, it should be like in other states, that there's mandatory safety training that you must take. I'm not going to give you a license without testing you on the car. Why would I give you access to a firearm and you have no knowledge whatsoever how to handle that firearm? You're not proficient. And you don't know how to properly store it. So we're suggesting that we can work together and demand that everybody who get a concealed carry license in the city of Philadelphia must be accompanied and acquired gun safety training, largely through that gun talk, because that's what we do.
Let me just say, this is the conversation I think our elected officials have. It seems like we agree on a set of things that went from ghost guns to some of the safe storage to some of the training pieces. And I think this is where a lot of Americans are, overall.
Well, I basically tell you that we've been reached out to quite a few Democratic officials in Philadelphia who are a little nuanced, saying, you know what, we got to change this conversation that they're having in Harrisburg about guns. And they bring us in and we talk and we share and we talk about, where we could bridge the gap, the political gap, so that we can save the community, because these stats better not. A lot of the things that's debated that we could be easily employed and it makes sense, that's stuck in our halls of justice. If you do the polling of the public, there's 70% on board with it.
They are, which warrants that if there was a bipartisan commission to be able to discuss it, then it could possibly lead to outcomes. But given in today's climate where we're left on the polls and not having some of the discussions to iron out the issues, we just remain stagnant.
There's been sort of a history of Philadelphia trying to have stricter gun laws than maybe the state would allow. Can you talk about how those two things have been intersecting over the years, and what authority does Philadelphia has when it comes to that kind of thing?
Oh, sure. I think my colleagues might be able to respond in more nuance than I can, but I think the simple theory is that it's the thinking that the state is regulating the issue and that there might be some unique parts of that issue in firearms county to county to county. So the state has to be uniform among its laws, called the uniformity clause. So if you're changing an aspect of some of the laws at the state in one county that's across the state, can you single out certain counties? Well, that's a question that we haven't really quite ironed out yet. But I think that Adam had spoken to some of those things that Philadelphia has done to kind of implement it, make it unique, because Philadelphia is a city of the first class with some of a couple of its own autonomous powers that it can do without permission of the state. And I think that we all in agreement that there are some parts of the Commonwealth where this issue is certainly unique, and it might pretend that it have a unique approach given, where we are, especially Philadelphia.
All right, I want to try to get a couple more questions from our students before we run out of time. Go ahead. Your name and your year.
My name is Ashley Martinez, and I am a senior here at Chestnut Hill College. I want to preface this by saying that I grew up in North Philly, and I went to school in North Philly, and I went to one of the schools that Darian mentioned. We had clear book bags, and we had to go through metal detectors and all that stuff. I personally know, let me pull up my research because I like to speak from facts, that Black Philadelphians are 21 times more likely to be murdered by firearms than other groups. I think in order to significantly reduce gun violence, a city must pursue a long-term solution while maintaining its current focus on pressing public matters. My thing is, we were speaking earlier about Krasner and about what he's doing. I did an internship at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. So as much as we hear that these changes are happening, I grew up in that community. I'm always in that community. My family still lives in that community. I don't see them being implemented. I don't see the reduction of my high school friends dying from gun violence. I don't see my little brother, my little sister being safe in that community. Granted, my school was on top of everything because I went to Community Academy of Philadelphia Charter School, and they didn't let anything play. Like, there was an altercation, it was getting fixed that day. But as someone who views this in their community and sees how many lives it's taken, how many moms I've seen cry because of their kids, that's why I believe we should have stricter laws. And not just that, I personally believe that we shouldn't have military-grade weapons. What is the purpose for a military-grade weapon? You can't hunt with an AK just because that would destroy the animal. And I've seen that. I know professional hunters, they're like, we prefer a bow and arrow because of the simple fact that it's the more humane way to kill an animal. So from my point of view, as my goals in life, I want to get to Senate and I want to make changes because I'm an immigrant to this country. I grew up in a lower end community that I still serve to this day. And I don't see, from this conversation, it's hard for me to see why we shouldn't implement harder or stricter laws. No one's saying we're going to take away all of your weapons, because I've grown up around weapons and guns in my life. Like, my father owns a gun. It's registered. He's legal. Like, he can carry it. I've grown up around guns. I'm never saying that you should remove the guns from people. I just think that not everyone should have the right to hold a military style weapon. And not just that, like, I don't see the purpose for them. And I understand that people have different views and that certain things are, like, people's preference. Makes sense. But I see this firsthand in my community. And it's hard for someone who doesn't see this firsthand in their community to understand the purpose and the reasons why we want these stricter laws.
Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
If any of you have any quick responses, I want to try to at least get one more question in.
Yeah, there's nothing she said that I can disagree with. Again, safety and preservation of lives is a greater holistic conversation. Our law enforcement utilizing laws that we have in the book, the acknowledgement that people who follow laws are law-abiding citizens, and it's not going to impact criminals. But we got to look at the conditions in North Philadelphia, again, that creates crime. We can't say that we want to remove guns and stop gun violence and put those laws on the books, but then we're not properly funding public education. We can't say let's stop violence and lock everybody up if we're not allowing people access to opportunity for jobs in the proximity of their homes and employment. We can't talk about gun laws but avoiding the mental health crisis in our city. So you're looking at those people, particularly our young people who are now becoming shooters. There are some dynamic things that have to change, not just acquisition of guns.
I'm sorry, Randy, I want to just get one more student in.
Thank you.
Thank you, actually.
My name's Eli Latchall. I'm a sophomore. I'm just wondering, how do you guys respond to the significant decreases in mass shootings in states where assault weapons are banned? I'm pretty sure in the 9 states that are banned, it's like 55% decrease in mass shootings. And from 1994 to 2004, where there was a ban on assault weapons or some type of ban, there was a 70% decrease. So I just don't know how, from my perspective, in good conscience, how you can see those numbers and those statistics and these facts and still, I don't know, support an assault style weapon or gun. Anybody can respond to this.
Okay. Since I'm the pro AR-15 guy here. Again, so I mean, this the conversation about this long barrel and these platforms that could fire multiple weapons in large capacity in the amount of time. There are quite a few of them. There are so many, it's just far beyond the AR-15. So the opportunity, well, the government would have a hell of a time trying to get them all back from the legal gun owners, for one. And then secondarily, those who are owning them illegally will never give them up. So did we reduce did we increase safety by taking them from legal gun owners who probably would never commit a crime from them, and only criminals have the opportunity to have access to those weapons? I don't know. But, it's a real question. I mean, it's the culture of America. This long barrel platform delivery system is extremely lethal. And that is without question. So this is why I say don't limit my ability to protect myself and have ownership of it, but I'm as equally adamant about doing everything we can that people who should not have access to them or have ownership, that we limit that as much as possible also.
30-second response.
Yeah, I think you've heard like a fairly reasonable discussion of this. I would say, yes, of course we should ban them. And I think the evidence is really clear and there are some logistical issues around it. But ultimately, like protecting kids' lives is the biggest thing. I think the actual discussion that's happening politically is very different. It's not about evidence. It's about the freedom and the sense that guns make you safer, even though a lot of the evidence is to the contrary. And I think there's like a whole set of cultural and industry reasons that have really changed in the last 40 years around firearms in this country that we did not have time to get into, but is actually the fundamental political conversation we're having in some ways.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, we ran out of time. I'd like to thank our panelists, Jeffrey Carroll, Adam Garber, and Randy Robinson.